There's a document that gets produced after every one of these incidents. It's called an investigation report. And somewhere in every investigation report, there's a sentence that reads, in some variation, the same way. The failure was foreseeable. The warning existed. The inspection was not performed to the required standard. Not, this was an act of God. Not, nobody could have predicted this. The opposite. The finding again and again is that the information was available in a maintenance log, in a manufacturer's manual, in a recommended inspection interval. And something, somewhere in the system, chose not to act on it.
2 people have been killed and 26 injured in an adventure park when a 6...
We are learning more about the roller coaster incident that happened yesterday at Cedar Point. It sent one guest to the hospital.
6 rides. 6 moments when the structure holding passengers in the air gave way. In front of crowds, in front of families, and in front of cameras that were never supposed to document what they recorded. From a launch cable that exploded at 82 miles per hour, to a pendulum shaft that snapped in two with 32 people aboard. The footage in every story you're about to watch exists. The machines broke in public. The paperwork explains why. This is Abandoned Thrills. September 16, 2009, Knott's Berry Farm, Buena Park, California. The Xcelerator roller coaster, a 205-foot hydraulic launch ride that fires its passengers to 82 miles per hour in 2.3 seconds, had been running without incident all morning. Kyle Wheeler, 12 years old, took his seat in the front row. His father, Russell, was beside him. The front row was where every kid wanted to sit. The full force of the launch, the clearest possible view of what was coming. What was coming, neither of them could have anticipated. The Xcelerator used a hydraulic launch cable under enormous tension. That cable was subject to fatigue over time, and Intamin, the ride's manufacturer, had specifically recommended it be inspected every month. Knott's Berry Farm had decided on 6 months instead. On September 16th, they were nearly 3 weeks overdue on even that reduced standard. The cable in use had not been assessed since December. The manufacturer's recommended inspection interval, monthly, existed in writing, in the manual provided to the park. Not followed. Not once in the cable's operational life had anyone asked why. At approximately 4 p.m., the train carrying Kyle and his father in the front car entered the launch sequence. 4 seconds in, the cable failed. It snapped under the pressure of the launch and whipped backward through the train. It struck Kyle Wheeler in the leg, a deep, jagged laceration that severed muscle tissue. It struck his father in the face. The train, its propulsion cut, coasted to a stop. What makes this incident unlike almost any other is what came next. The Xcelerator had an on-ride camera, installed to sell souvenir footage to riders. The moment the cable snapped, the debris flying through the air, the wheelers being struck, all of it was recorded from inside the train. That footage leaked to YouTube. News stations across California broadcast it the same evening. Both Kyle and his father were transported to a local hospital. Kyle's injuries required immediate surgical intervention. What was reported as a laceration was damage significant enough to require skin grafting, physical rehabilitation, and months of ongoing care. His mother, Anita Wheeler, had been watching from the ground when the cable failed. Knott's Berry Farm spokeswoman Jennifer Blasey confirmed the incident and announced the ride was closed. Park officials said their crews had followed proper protocols. The California Division of Occupational Safety and Health investigated and found otherwise. The state's finding was unambiguous. The accident could have been avoided. The cable had not been inspected on the manufacturer's recommended monthly schedule. It had not been replaced when it should have been. Knott's Berry Farm was operating a hydraulic launch cable on a timeline of their own choosing, one that bore no relation to the one their manufacturer had specified. Knott's Berry Farm reached a confidential financial settlement with the Wheeler family. Kyle underwent multiple surgeries and extensive physical therapy. His attorney confirmed he would require a further operation, valued at $30,000, to remove accumulated scar tissue years into the future. Medical bills had already surpassed $60,000 at time of settlement. The Xcelerator was modified and eventually reopened. The footage of the cable snapping has never disappeared from the internet. Kyle Wheeler was 12 years old and in the front row because that is where kids want to sit. The camera that documented what happened was installed to sell souvenirs. It became evidence instead. Knott's Berry Farm had the inspection schedule from the manufacturer. They chose a different one. The cable wore out on their schedule, not Intamin's. Half a world away, 10 years later, a ride would not break a cable. It would break the entire machine. And nobody would have any documentation of its last inspection at all. July 14th, 2019. Kankaria Amusement Park, Ahmedabad, India. The Discovery Ride, a 32-seat pendulum attraction that swings its passengers in wide climbing arcs, was one of the park's busiest attractions on a Sunday afternoon. Families, friends, a full load. Rising to roughly 60 feet at the apex of each swing, a normal Sunday. The Discovery Ride operates on a single structural principle. A main shaft powers the pendulum arm that carries the gondola. The integrity of that shaft is the single most critical safety factor on the machine. If it holds, everyone rides. If it fails, there is no secondary system, no backup, no catch. The shaft in use at Kankaria that afternoon had not been inspected to any documented standard. There is no record in any subsequent investigation of the shaft having been opened for internal examination. There is no record of material fatigue having been assessed. There is a shaft. There is a ride. There are 32 passengers. And there is nothing between those 32 passengers and whatever the shaft contains. The main shaft snapped. Not cracked, not bent, snapped, splitting the ride at its structural center. The gondola carrying 32 people came crashing to the ground. Bystanders had their phones out. The footage reached social media within the hour and international news outlets the same day. It shows the arm in mid-swing, passengers visible in their seats, and then the collapse. 2 people were killed, 29 were injured. Ahmedabad's chief fire officer, M.F. Dastur, confirmed the cause to the press. The pipe of the main shaft broke and crashed on the ground. Emergency services responded. Dozens of casualties required hospital care. The park was shut immediately. Ahmedabad Municipal Commissioner Vijay Nehra directed police to launch a criminal investigation. The question was no longer whether the ride had failed. The footage answered that. The question was how long the failure had been building and who had been responsible for the maintenance that would have found it. Investigators from the Forensic Science Laboratory were brought in to examine the structural failure. What emerged was a finding consistent with amusement ride disasters across every country. Internal metal fatigue, invisible from the outside, undetected until it expressed itself catastrophically at 60 feet in the air. A criminal investigation was launched to determine whether the park had met the inspection requirements necessary to identify this kind of structural deterioration. No record of those inspections having been performed to the required standard was produced. 32 people had been loaded onto a gondola supported by a shaft that would not hold them. Nobody had opened it to check. 2 people did not leave Kankaria that Sunday. The footage spread to every continent within hours. Both stories so far share the same architecture: a maintenance schedule not followed, an inspection interval not met, a component that should have been checked and wasn't. The next story is different. At Cedar Point in Ohio, the inspection was completed the evening before the accident. The ride passed, an inspector signed off, and the next morning, Rachel Hawes was standing in line for a coaster whose bracket was still coming loose, in a way no visual inspection could have detected, because nobody had asked the right kind of question. August 15th, 2021, Cedar Point, Sandusky, Ohio. When Top Thrill Dragster opened in 2003, it was the tallest roller coaster in the world, 420 feet, with a launch to 120 miles per hour in 3.8 seconds. By the summer of 2021, 18 million people had ridden it. It was considered one of the great engineering achievements in the history of the industry. Rachel Hawes, 44 years old, of Swartz Creek, Michigan, was not on the ride. She was standing in line, waiting her turn, when the train passed overhead. Each train on the dragster carried dozens of small mechanical components, bolts, brackets, plates, designed to withstand thousands of high-speed cycles. One of those components was a proximity flag plate, an L-shaped metal bracket, roughly the size of an adult hand, attached to the rear of a train car by a series of bolts. The Ohio Department of Agriculture's subsequent investigation found that half of those bolts had come loose. Across multiple sections of the track, directly above the queue area where guests waited, there were signs of wear, deformation, and impact marks that had accumulated over time. The ride had been inspected the previous evening. It had passed. Because the inspection was visual, and the bolt deterioration was not visible. And nobody had asked at any point in the dragster's 18-year operating history whether a visual inspection of this component was sufficient for a machine that launched its trains at 120 miles per hour. At some point during that Sunday's operating day, as a train completed its circuit and returned toward the station, the flag plate dislodged from the rear car. It struck Rachel Hawes in the back of the head. Body camera footage from first responders was obtained and broadcast by local television news within days. Chaotic scenes at the ride's exit, emergency personnel responding. One witness told 3 News, "Everybody's running, and so I went the other direction to try and find her."
We all saw it fly off. On the top of one of those things and shot downward.
Rachel Hawes was transported first to an area hospital, then to a trauma center in Toledo. Her family confirmed she had suffered a traumatic brain injury, a skull fracture, subarachnoid hemorrhage, bleeding in the tissue surrounding the brain. She was fighting for her life. The ride closed immediately. Cedar Point announced the dragster would not reopen for the remainder of the 2021 season. The Ohio Department of Agriculture began its investigation within days. The ODA's investigation, completed in February 2022, confirmed that half the bolts securing the flag plate had failed, and the plate had dislodged as a result. The investigation found signs of wear, deformation, and impact marking on the track sections directly above the queue. Evidence the problem had been developing across multiple rides over time in a location that a standard visual inspection would not have flagged. The ODA found Cedar Point had not violated state law. No criminal charges were filed. Cedar Fair reached a confidential financial settlement with Rachel Hawes. Her medical bills had already exceeded $2 million. Future costs were projected to surpass 10 million. Her lawsuit stated she had been rendered permanently disabled and would no longer be able to work. Top Thrill Dragster never reopened in its original form. Cedar Point contracted Zamperla to redesign it from scratch. It reopened in 2024 as Top Thrill 2. 18 million rides. Then a Sunday afternoon. Then a bracket the size of a hand. The inspection the night before had found nothing. It wasn't incompetent. It was the wrong kind of inspection for the failure that was developing. A visual check of a component whose failure mode was internal, bolt fatigue, hidden stress, deterioration you cannot see from the outside. Knott's Berry Farm ignored the inspection schedule. Kankaria had no inspection record at all. Cedar Point followed the schedule and still missed it because the schedule didn't ask the right questions. The next story is about a roller coaster whose replacement parts were certified, installed, signed off, and still catastrophically wrong because no one in the chain of custody had checked whether the parts they ordered matched the specifications they needed. If you're watching this on your TV, phone, or any other device right now, and you want to see more stories like these, the Abandoned Thrills channel has documented amusement park accidents, the investigations that followed, and the changes that came after, or didn't. Search Abandoned Thrills on YouTube. June 25th, 2023, 11:36 in the morning, Stockholm, Sweden. Gröna Lund has been operating since 1883, one of the oldest continuously running amusement parks in Europe. On a clear Sunday morning in June, the park was full. The Jetline roller coaster, a 98-foot steel coaster reaching 56 miles per hour, had been running at the park since 1988. Karin Elmegard and her husband Mikael were in the rear car of Train E, 14 riders aboard, a routine summer morning. In 2019, Gröna Lund's maintenance team had discovered cracks in the front control arm of one of the Jetline's trains, the structural component that carries the wheels and keeps the train on the track. The decision was made to replace the front control arms across the entire fleet. The replacement arms were ordered from a Swedish subcontractor, Mekosmos AB, who outsourced the manufacturing to a company called GMW. What arrived deviated from the original Schwarzkopf design specifications. A required backing bar was missing. Several welds contained significant structural defects. The finished components had substantially reduced load-bearing capacity. They were delivered to Gröna Lund. They were installed. They were certified. The Jetline reopened with them fitted. The Swedish Accident Investigation Authority's report would later note that the deviations from specification were not checked against the original drawings at any point in the process, not when ordered, not when received, not when installed. March 2023, 3 months before the accident. As Train E approached its third rise, the defective front control arm fractured. The original design would have withstood the operational forces. This replacement could not. The front car partially derailed. The train came to a sudden, violent stop at height. 3 riders were thrown. Karin Elmegard fell 20 feet to the ground. Her husband, Mikael, also ejected, grabbed a structural beam and held on. He watched his wife fall from where he was clinging in midair. Bystanders filmed it. The park's own CCTV footage was played in open court in Stockholm in November 2025, showing the moment 2 passengers were separated from the carriage. The first emergency call reached SOS alarm at 11:38 a.m., 2 minutes after the derailment. Fire services arrived at 11:45. Riders were found on the ground and others trapped in the partially derailed train. One woman in her 30s was pronounced dead at the scene. 9 people were hospitalized. 3 of the injured were children. Speaking in court in November 2025, Mikael Elmegard described the moment. "It was horrifying to see my wife fall out of the car. When I saw her lying on the ground, her face covered in blood, I didn't know if she had survived." The Swedish Accident Investigation Authority published its full report on June 14, 2024. The finding was precise. The replacement control arm had been manufactured with defective welds and without the structural backing bar specified in the original design. It lacked the load-bearing capacity to operate safely. It had been installed, certified, and run for 3 months before it gave way. 3 organizations were found responsible: Gröna Lund, which placed an insufficiently specified order; Mekosmos, which subcontracted without adequate oversight; and GMW, which manufactured the defective component. On January 28, 2026, the Stockholm District Court convicted Gröna Lund and imposed a fine of 5.2 million Swedish kroner. The Jetline was permanently closed and demolished. Its 35-year operating history ended on a June morning when a replacement part, ordered to fix a safety problem, manufactured with new safety problems, installed without anyone checking whether the new part matched the old specification, could no longer hold the weight of the train. Mikael Elmegard survived by grabbing a beam in midair. Karin Elmegard required surgery. One person did not come home from Gröna Lund that morning. The parts were ordered to make the ride safer. The problem was in the order. Nobody checked. 4 rides, 4 different failure modes, a schedule ignored, an inspection that didn't exist, a check that was the wrong type, and now a part that was certified incorrect. The next 2 stories don't involve fixed parks with engineering departments and corporate parents. They involve rides that travel. Rides assembled at night in car parks and fairgrounds, permitted by local authorities, inspected, if inspected at all, in the hours before they open. The next story takes place at a fair that was extended past its closing date. Because a local authority issued a permission, and nobody checked whether the drop tower that would fall from 50 feet had been verified as safe for an extra week of operation. September 4th, 2022, Mohali, Punjab, India. A traveling fair had been operating in the city since late August. It had been officially extended. Originally due to close August 31st, it received permission to continue through September 11th. Among its attractions was a drop tower, a vertical structure that carries passengers up on a circular platform, then drops them in a controlled freefall. At approximately 9:15 in the evening, the platform was occupied. Passengers seated. The tower in operation. Drop tower rides depend entirely on one system: mechanical braking that arrests the platform's descent before it reaches the ground. Without that engagement, there is no backup, no secondary arrest, nothing. The platform was approximately 50 feet in the air. Fair organizers would later describe a technical issue. No detailed inspection documentation for this ride, during the extension period that took it past its permitted close date, was produced to establish the machine had been verified as safe for continued operation. There is the permission to extend. There is the ride. There is no record that connects one to the other. The braking system failed to engage. The circular platform fell from 50 feet without deceleration. It struck the ground at speed. Video captured by bystanders was posted to social media the same evening. It circulated internationally within hours, showing the platform reaching its apex and then dropping, uncontrolled, into the ground below. 16 people were hospitalized. A number were children. Witnesses described immediate chaos. Reports from the scene noted ambulances were delayed and no on-site safety personnel had the resources to provide immediate medical intervention. The ride was shut. The fair continued operating its other attractions. That the fair remained open at all in the hours after an incident that hospitalized 16 people, including children, drew immediate public outrage across Indian and international media. Authorities opened an investigation into the mechanical failure and into the licensing conditions under which the extended fair had been permitted to operate. The organizers acknowledged the technical issue. They did not explain what had failed, when it had last been assessed, or what the inspection requirements were for the extension period. The investigation identified a pattern consistent with traveling fair incidents across multiple countries. Rides assembled and disassembled across locations, operated under inconsistent regulatory oversight, inspected, where inspected at all, without the technical specificity required to detect internal deterioration. There is a permission to extend. There is a ride. 16 people go to hospital. And nobody who issued the permission had required anyone to answer, "Has this machine been verified as safe for the extra 11 days?" The families at the Mohali Fair that evening had come out for an extra night of a fair that had already been given extra time. They were there because the extension was granted. Everything that followed was filmed and watched around the world. The final story in this video ends with an 18-year-old named Tyler Jarrell, who had signed his Marine Corps enlistment papers 4 days before the night that killed him. His ride didn't fail because the inspection was the wrong kind. It didn't fail because a replacement part was incorrectly manufactured. It failed because the ride itself was 19 years old. And in 19 years of operation, nobody had ever required anyone to open the gondola arm and look at what was happening to the metal inside it. The corrosion had been building since 1998. July 26, 2017, Columbus, Ohio. The first night of the Ohio State Fair. Tyler Jarrell was 18 years old. He'd graduated from Franklin Heights High School that spring. 4 days earlier, on July 22, 2017, he had walked into a Marine Corps recruiting office and signed his enlistment papers. He was scheduled to begin basic training the following year. He went to the fair that evening with his girlfriend, Keziah Lewis, 19 years old, a student at the University of Cincinnati. They joined the line for the Fireball. The Fireball was a pendulum ride manufactured by KMG, a Dutch company, in 1998. It swung 24 riders back and forth in a 40-foot arc, spinning the gondola at the top of each swing. On the operating company's website, it was described as one of the most popular rides on the Midway. What it was not described as was 19 years old. 19 years of cycles, of stress, of exposure. The gondola support arm, the structural component connecting the passenger section to the main drive, had been corroding from the inside. Not on the surface where an inspector could see it. Inside, hidden behind the exterior metal casing, the wall thickness of the beam had been catastrophically reduced by oxidization. Ohio State officials had inspected the Fireball 3 or 4 times before the fair opened. None of those inspections had required the beam to be opened. The corrosion had been building since the Clinton administration. Nobody had ever looked for it. Nothing in any inspection protocol, state, manufacturer, or fair operator, required anyone to open that beam and measure what was left of the wall inside. At approximately 7:24 p.m., the Fireball was mid-cycle, passengers at the peak of the arc, when the support arm fractured. An entire row of 4 seats detached from the ride. The riders were ejected at high speed and traveled 20 to 30 feet before striking the ground. Julian Bellinger was standing in line. He had his phone out. His footage, broadcast on ABC News, NBC, and every major national outlet within hours, showed the arm snapping, the row of seats separating from the gondola, and riders flying through the air at the top of the swing. Kaylee Bellamy was next in line. She described it this way. "The ride was going as normal, and then I saw somebody fall on the ride, and then a minute later, the whole row of seats fell off." Ohio State Highway Patrol Superintendent Colonel Paul Pride confirmed it to the press. 1 person had died at the scene. 7 others were transported to hospital, 3 in critical condition. Tyler Jarrell was the person who died. He was pronounced dead from blunt force trauma. Keziah Lewis, his girlfriend, was in critical condition. She had suffered a shattered pelvis, a broken ankle, and broken ribs. When she regained consciousness in hospital, she kept asking for Tyler. Her mother, Clarissa Williams, had to tell her that he was gone. Tyler's father, Anthony Jarrell, spoke to the press the following day. "He was loved and had a future until the disaster at the Ohio Fair. My question is, who is responsible for not doing their job of inspecting the rides?" KMG, the Dutch manufacturer, issued their findings 9 days after the incident. The conclusion? Excessive corrosion on the interior of the gondola support beam dangerously reduced the beam's wall thickness over the years. This finally led to the catastrophic failure of the ride during operation. The corrosion had been invisible. It existed inside the structural member, behind the outer casing. No external inspection, by the fair, by the state, or by the manufacturer's own representatives, had ever required the beam to be opened and examined internally. In 19 years. In 2024, a New Jersey court awarded 4 survivors of the Fireball accident a combined $78 million judgment against KMG Rides. Keziah Lewis received $20 million. Speaking to local news in 2024, 7 years after the accident, she described going on a cruise, attending music festivals, working through her recovery step by step. "I feel like I'm just knocking off things off my bucket list," she said, "and healing my inner child slowly." Ohio passed Tyler's Law in the aftermath of his death, mandating additional safety requirements for amusement rides across the state. Tennessee, California, Indiana, and Kentucky issued bans on all Fireball rides. Multiple countries opened reviews of the same model. The United States Marine Corps issued a statement upon confirming Tyler's enlistment. "We are truly proud to have known him as one of the brave few willing to step up and serve his country. He was 18 years old. He had a girlfriend who loved him, a branch of the military waiting for him, and one last night at the Ohio State Fair before everything started." The support arm that killed him had been corroding in the dark for years, in a place no inspector ever looked, deteriorating cycle by cycle until July 26, 2017, when it could no longer hold. The footage exists, the verdict has been delivered, and Tyler Jarrell's name is remembered. Stories like these deserve to be remembered. And if you believe that too, Abandoned Thrills documents them every week. 6 rides, 6 investigations, 6 reports that found in some version of the same language the same thing. a cable inspected every 6 months instead of every month, because nobody at Knott's Berry Farm had questioned a schedule they chose for themselves. A pendulum shaft at Kankaria that had never been opened for examination on a ride that had no documented inspection at all. A metal bracket at Cedar Point shedding its bolts through thousands of cycles directly above a queue of guests in a way a visual inspection could never have detected. Because the inspection protocol didn't ask the right question. A replacement control arm in Stockholm ordered to fix a safety problem, manufactured with defective welds and missing a required backing bar, installed and certified without anyone verifying whether it matched the original specification. A drop tower at a traveling fair in Mohali extended past its permitted close date, falling from 50 feet when its brakes failed to engage, with no inspection documentation produced for the extension period. And a pendulum ride at the Ohio State Fair, 19 years old, corroding from the inside on a beam nobody in 19 years of operation had ever opened to examine. Each failure had a specific name. Each name was in a document before the incident. The cable inspection interval was in Intamin's manual. The required backing bar was in Schwarzkopf's original drawings. The beam's interior was accessible. It required a tool and a decision to use it and a protocol that said to do so. None of those protocols existed. Top Thrill Dragster reopened in 2024 as Top Thrill 2, a new ride built by a different manufacturer. The queue for it passes over the section of track where Rachel Hawes was standing when the bracket struck her. The Fireball model KMG, manufactured in 1998, the same model, the same design, operated at fairs across 12 states in the years after Tyler Gerald died. Tyler's Law is now on the books in Ohio. The state that passed it still does not require an inspector to open the gondola beam. The machines break in public. The paperwork explains why. And in the years after each of these incidents, some of what the paperwork required was changed. Some of it wasn't. This has been Abandoned Thrills, where we document the accidents that changed everything. Subscribe to make sure you never miss the next one.